Welcome to the Oshow. I'm Laura Babcock. This weekend there was a huge protest against climate change and the Greenbelt that happened at Queen's Park. And our guest today, the leader of the Ontario Green Party, was there. And I'm so glad to have you joining us here on the program, Mike, because I got a lot of questions for you. Mike Schreiner, welcome to the Oshow.
Hey, Laura, it's a pleasure to be on. I've been a big fan, so looking forward to the conversation.
Well, I love that attitude because we never tell anyone what we're going to ask here. It's just a conversation. So let's start with what you posted on social media. You said, thanks everyone for the great energy coming out this weekend. I'm going to channel it into Queen's Park, as we know the legislature is about to reconvene after the summer break. But Mike, what does that actually mean? Because as a party, you've already put forward 5 bills you've tabled. I mean, what can you do at Queen's Park to actually hold Ford to account?
Well, we're going to keep putting the pressure on this government, utilizing all the tools that we can and channeling the rightful outrage that you're hearing in communities across the province. I mean, everywhere I go in Ontario, people are angry about this $8.3 billion Greenbelt scandal. And if you look in communities, not even next to the Greenbelt, I mean, we're talking in places like Guelph. I've been spending a lot of time in Kitchener and other communities. You see signs everywhere saying, Doug Ford, keep your Greenbelt promise, keep your hands off the Greenbelt. So this is an issue that's penetrating deeply into, our population in Ontario. They want the premier to step up to the microphone and say, I'm going to keep my promise. I'm going to restore all protections to the Greenbelt, and we're going to continue to put the pressure on. I'll work across party lines with the other opposition parties, but it's going to be through the bills we put forward, the questions we ask, the media pressure we put on the government, supporting protests at Queen's Park, but more importantly, a lot of the protests that are happening in communities across the province, continuing to just amp up the pressure on this government. I absolutely support the RCMP conducting an investigation. And I've also been calling for an independent public inquiry because I think the people of Ontario deserve honest answers about how this corrupt process could even happen, where a handful of well-connected Ford insiders could hand envelopes to the minister's chief of staff directing government policy where they benefit to the tune of $8.3 billion. And I also want to know how Greenbelt protections on land that's supposed to be protected forever can be changed through regulation, like not even through legislation, through regulation. And I think the people of Ontario deserve honest answers around that. And we need answers that will help us ensure that something like this never happens again.
Well, I want to break that down with you because you've said a number of things there, but let me say just off the top, when I posted that you were coming on the program, somebody said, sorry, Laura, I'm with Merritt Stiles. And I responded by saying, we should all be together on this. This is not a partisan issue. I don't even think it's a political issue. I think it's an issue of accountability and of corruption. And I'll have Merritt on the program probably this week to see how she's approaching it. But I'm glad to hear that you, Mike, are willing to work with the other opposition parties. This is not a time to be divided and conquered by the Ford majority. But let me just dive down a little bit. You have been going all over the province. I found it's really interesting when I've been doing shows with people out of market who are from Ottawa and other places. Initially, when this broke, it was more of a, GTHA kind of issue. We're kind of sick of talking about it. But I think as people saw drip by drip the level of corruption. I mean, that image of an envelope being handed at a dinner by a lobbyist, and that changes policy, that changes the future, that carves out the lungs of the GTA for our families. I mean, that, I think for most people, they look at that and they go, wow, now that that walks like a duck, talks like a duck, looks like a duck of corruption. So how do you feel when you see that out of just around the Greenbelt, but the broader response and the numbers of this premier tanking to the lowest that they've ever been for him?
Yeah, when I've done a number of interviews now, Ottawa, Sudbury, Thunder Bay, like parts of the province that aren't even close to the Greenbelt. And there are two key components of this scandal that I think are motivating outrage, whether you live in the GTA or not. So one is the corruption. I mean, it is so clear that a corrupt process led to a corrupt decision. Windfall profits of $8.3 billion, which, by the way, are 2016 numbers. So that's likely. I've met with some economists who are saying that the value of that land is maybe even double. So this might be a $16 billion scandal. So that just outrages people. Like, how can a handful of wealthy, well-connected Ford insiders direct government policy for their own personal benefit of billions of dollars? And then the second one is the housing crisis is affecting people in communities across the province. Northern Ontario, Eastern Ontario, West, Southern, the housing crisis is everywhere. And instead of having a premier focused on building the homes that people can afford in the communities they want to live in on land that's already approved for development, he's breaking all the rules, rolling out the red carpet for a handful of land speculators to cash in billions of dollars. I think people are rightfully outraged. They want a premier that's going to be working for them, for ordinary people to be able to afford a home. And that's not where the premier's focus. That's not where his priority is. And I think the combination of the corruption and the misplaced priorities on wealthy elites over ordinary Ontarians is outraging people in communities across Ontario, whether you live near the Greenbelt or not.
And that makes total sense. And I want to add to that outrage because I'm outraged. When, a lot went on with that Ford Fest I think it was in Kitchener, wherever he was. And there's a big protest that actually made him back up and reroute, which is what I'm hoping, is going to happen on the entire situation, that we get the lands back if he ever gets to number 15 from the Auditor General's recommendations. But he actually said something at that meeting, Mike, that has me so angry. And I want your response to it, because I think it goes to the heart of what you are saying. You have people across this province who are desperate for affordable housing, who want the dream, but have never been able to access it with the cost of housing going through the roof the last 10 years, and they don't see a way that they're ever going to. And then you have the premier standing in front of his group at Ford Fest and actually saying to them, I'm going to make a promise here, folks. I'm going to build, we're going to donate land with municipalities and build houses with 1,600-foot houses with backyards with fences, with finished basements for in-law suites and for families, and a paved driveway. And we're going to do it for $500,000, folks. Mike, I have a house that fits those descriptions, right? It ain't worth $500,000, and I live in in not the best neighborhood. It's still worth double that. So for him to say that makes me so furious, because he's giving false hope to people. Forget about the fact that he lies, and forget about the fact that he's benefiting the billionaires. He's giving false hope at a time when people are really desperate, and that makes me enraged. So what was your feedback when you heard that magical $500,000 picket fence promise?
Well, first of all, Laura, I just want to say I was out with the crowd in Kitchener, spoke at the rally along with Ashlyn Clancy, our fantastic candidate in Kitchener Center. And, the premier said a couple things that I want to mention in addition to that. So one, he said the protesters were bussed in. That is a flat out lie. Like, I parked a long ways away and walked with a whole bunch of other people who walked there. And I also saw people getting off of just Kitchener Transit and walking to the rally. So, these were just ordinary Ontarians outraged. This wasn't like professional protesters or people being bussed there. Second, his false promise around, the homes that somehow Doug's going to build, reminds me of his buck of beer promise. Look at how that worked out. I don't know if anywhere you can get a beer for a buck in the province of Ontario. And to provide the false hope to people, the only way we're going to build houses at that price is if the government gets back into building housing again. There was a time prior to 1995 where about 20,000 housing starts a year were co-op, nonprofit, and social housing. And unless the Ford government is going to allocate funding to actually get the province back at the table. This is something I'm advocating for, to be a part of working with co-ops and nonprofits to build more deeply affordable homes, as well as deeply affordable rental homes and attainable home ownership. That simply is not going to happen. And so for the premier to even suggest that is outrageous. And then the final thing I want to say that he said there that I thought was completely disgusting was for him to punch down on trans and non-binary kids to try to distract from his Greenbelt scandal. I thought was just disgusting. I think we as elected officials, we have a duty to ensure that the safety of everyone in our province, especially kids in our school system, and for the premier to violate that in the way that he did to distract from the Greenbelt scandal, I thought was disgusting.
It was disgusting, and I my comment on that, and I'll keep saying it, is only weak politicians pick on kids, right? Leave them alone.
Yeah.
It's such it is hard enough being a child or a teenager in 2023, let alone being someone who's transgendered, and then to have the premier of the province decide to use them and as sort of a throwaway line to rev up the base. I find that disgusting, and I'm so glad that you called it out. So let me ask you personally, because obviously this summer for you, I mean, when the Greenbelt got, the news came out back in October, you've been busy since then protesting hands off the Greenbelt. But like when the AG report came out, Mike, how did you feel to read the level of detail in that, and then the Integrity Commissioner's report? I mean, as someone who cares about the environment much more than I do, what was it like for you to see just how shameless and what a greedy land grab this is?
Well, in many respects, Laura, it was validation. I mean, I called this out the day the government announced that they were going to open the Greenbelt for development. I think I was the first MPP at Queen's Park who was up going, this is outrageous. This doesn't pass the smell test. I think the Auditor General's report shows concretely how important it is for the three opposition parties to work together. I mean, the Auditor General received a letter from all three of us, and that's what really provided the impetus to do this type of investigation. And it validated so much of what I had been saying, and I know others have been saying, that this Greenbelt land grab is a corrupt process that led to a corrupt decision to benefit a handful of wealthy, well-connected Ford insiders. And I can tell you, Laura, I have not had a day off since the day the Auditor General's report was released. And I am not complaining, because I'm going to fight like heck until the premier steps up to a microphone and says, I'm going to keep my promise not to touch the Greenbelt. I'm going to restore protections to all those Greenbelt lands.
But I know you called it, you recognized a corrupt process leading to a corrupt decision. So I want to get to what we can do about that if that is found to be the case. But did you think it would be this bad, Mike? I mean, did you anticipate the level of, I mean, we got all these crazy characters in this thing and these, it feels to me it would be comical if it wasn't so important.
Yeah, I think the Integrity Commissioner's report took it to another level. I mean, Mr. X is just like a character that comes out of a novel, not like politics in Ontario. And I think the other revelation that, the Auditor General and the Integrity Commissioner identified, I always thought it was somebody in government tipping off the landowners, and that's what led to, the purchases of land and some of the shady deals that were happening last fall. But to learn that it actually was worse than that, it was, three land speculators handing an envelope to the premier saying, these are the lands that we want. I should say the housing minister's chief of staff, but, I'll tell you, Laura, all roads lead to the premier's office. But for three individuals to hand an envelope directing government policy that then led to windfall profits for them of at least $8.3 billion, if not more, was worse than I thought. And so I think this scandal is even worse than what many of us thought it was. And I think it's one of the reasons we need a public inquiry, because we need to make sure that We have the governing processes, the land protections, the lobbying rules. Like there's a whole bunch of, I think, policy changes that need to happen in Ontario to make sure a scandal like this never happens again, and to ensure that when we say we're protecting land, the farmland that feeds us, the wetlands and forests that clean our drinking water and, you know, protect us from climate fueled extreme weather events, that they're actually protected.
I agree with you on public inquiry, but I just have to push back a little bit, Mike. Even if you put in processes, there were processes in place. The Greenbelt wasn't supposed to be open for 10 years before another review. I mean, if you've got a leader who doesn't care about the rules and lies to camera, like, I promise you I won't do this, and then does it on some bogus narrative that he needs the land for 1.5 million housing, when we know for a fact 2 million homes are available within the existing boundaries, right? It's a lie. And so will new policies come? Are you more of an optimist than me that you can actually put in policies that a corrupt government would be forced to follow?
Well, I mean, we've certainly seen a deterioration of democratic norms in North America. I mean, really starting in the US with Trump's election, but we're seeing it across the world, around the world now, and unfortunately right here in Ontario. And so I'm interested in, how do we put legislative guardrails in place to, if not prevent this kind of corruption, at least slow it down or do what we can to eliminate it? I think one of the things on the Greenbelt land giveaway is it didn't even require legislation. The premier did this through regulation. So even if it at least had to be a legislative change, then there would be debate in the legislature. There would be time for people to mobilize. But this was done through regulation. That being said, the government did pass had to pass legislation on the Dauphin Rouge Agricultural Preserve because there were conservation easements on that land, and so we did debate that in the legislature, and that's the biggest chunk of Greenbelt land that's being taken out. And by the way, some of the best farmland in all of North America. But I'm interested in, what can we learn from this process to do everything we can to prevent it from happening again in the future. But you raise a good point and a valid pushback that if you have a corrupt government, they find ways to get around these legislative guardrails. But the more guardrails we can have in place, the more opportunities we give the people of Ontario to push back against it.
So I'm with you. I'm glad that you're adding more guardrails to the process. I think that's really important. But can the Greenbelt lands be saved, Mike? I mean, is there enough available tools in the kit, legally or legislatively or populist uprising? I mean, really, truly, for our Oshow viewers who care desperately about this situation, is this just Pollyannic that this can be stopped? Is it, or can it be stopped?
I think we can stop it, and I'm not going to give up until we do stop it. And, you know, some of the tools we haven't talked about yet is, you know, I'm calling on the federal government to intervene here, especially on the Dauphin Rouge Agricultural Preserve, which is the largest chunk of land, because there are clear, you know, indications that paving over that land will negatively affect the Rouge National Urban Park. Also, the federal government, under the Federal Endangered Species Act, has an obligation to ensure species protection. The science is suggesting that there could be as many as 29 species at risk due to opening the Greenbelt for development. So that gives the federal government an avenue to intervene. I've heard a number of municipalities saying, you know, even if we wanted to service these lands, which many of them don't, and, you know, shout out to Hamilton, man. Hamilton's been pushing back not only on the Greenbelt, but the enforced urban boundary expansion. But many municipalities are saying we can't afford it. Like, not only is the government imposing expensive sprawl onto municipalities, but they're actually taking money away from municipalities, money that's needed to service these lands. And what I mean by servicing is you need sewer lines, you need water lines, you need hydro lines, you need roads. If you build these neighborhoods out, you're going to need libraries and schools and all this infrastructure that builds a community and ensures that your home is a viable place to live. Like, On the Dufferin Rouge Agricultural Preserve, as an example, some planners have said it's going to take 25 years before those lands would ever be serviced. Not that we would want to service them, because it's prime farmland that we're losing at an unsustainable rate. So not only are municipalities, coming out against what the Ford government is doing, but they also simply cannot afford it. And that's exactly why I've got 2 bills in front of the legislature right now that would get rid of what's known as exclusionary zoning. That's rules that make it illegal to build gentle density and missing middle housing, that would say, hey, let's make every neighborhood, you can do 4plexes if you want, or 4-story walk-up apartments, or along major transportation corridors, you can build 6 to 11-story apartment buildings. That way we can actually build homes and rental homes that people can afford in the communities they want to live in, on land that's not only already approved for development, but already has servicing in place. So we don't have to spend a lot of money on a bunch more infrastructure. That's how we're going to increase housing supply that people can afford. That's how we're going to build communities that are great places to live, where you can actually, walk to stores and restaurants and get your groceries and, access the pharmacy or whatever else you need in your neighborhood. That's how we create a high quality of life that people can afford.
Well, I'm agreeing with you on all of the above. And in fact, just on the Hamilton shout out for a second, John Paul Danko, a counselor, was on this past week, as well as Alex Wilson, another counselor on the Oshow. But Danko spoke to the fact that the city, may not even work with the facilitator anymore provincially, because it's such an illegitimate process. And so they are fighting back, and they're also looking at a judicial review, which the counselor admitted isn't going to pause things. But I think, like you, and he said, there's lots of tools, right? And what I want to make sure is that elected officials are using the tools, not just, enjoying the ramp up of the public support, but doing stuff legislatively, whichever way can happen. So let me move to densification, because I think it's key to this argument, right? Ford saying we need housing. Nobody disputes this. I had the former premier on last week on the Oshow, Kathleen Wynne. Everybody stipulates we need housing. We need affordable housing. We need it fast. But the plan is already there for densification within these urban boundaries. And Jennifer Keesmaat had something out this morning talking about it. And as you described those, I know you're a supporter of 15-minute cities, as I am, right? Or communities where if you have a cafe and you have access and you can walk everywhere, you're healthier, life is better. The most successful communities in the world, called blue zones, are organically like that, and Singapore is even working to legislate to become a blue zone. And I just spent time in Paris, living in an apartment for 12 days, and got to experience what a 15-minute city feels like. And it is a wonderful objective we should all want, no matter how we feel about Doug Ford. It is a better, healthier, more affordable way to live. But Mike, as we're looking at doing that here in Hamilton, there is already pushback. People who might want to fight the Greenbelt grab don't want those densification buildings in their communities. It's turning into this gross NIMBY thing. It's like, pick a lane. Do you support protecting the urban boundary? And if you do, it might be your backyard that's affected. I mean, what do you say to people who, are trying to have it both ways in this discussion?
Yeah, I think if you want to protect the Greenbelt and you want climate action and you want livable, affordable, great communities to live in, then you have to become a YIMBY. Yes, in my backyard. I'm a YIMBY. I'm a proud YIMBY. And I think there are some things the province can do to help municipalities. It's one of the reasons I've put forward the bills I've put forward to say, the province is going to get rid of exclusionary zoning. So you take the pressure off of municipal councilors, and you also take the pressure from developers playing municipalities off of each other. And you just say, hey, this is the rule, right? So that's one. Two, let's look at best practices from other jurisdictions around the world, particularly around public consultation. So right now, the public consultation is usually, you hear from the people who already live there. That's it. Right. Places like Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I'm looking at a number of cities in Oregon as well that have YIMBY campaigns, are opening those press houses up to have the people who want to live in the neighborhood be able to participate in the public consultation process as well. that makes a huge, huge difference. And I want to give you a concrete example here in Guelph. There is a co-housing project just not too far from me that the neighborhood was completely opposed to. They're like, we're a single family neighborhood. Like, why are you going to build this multiplex with, a number of housing spaces in it? We don't want it in our neighborhood. Now that it's built and people have moved in, all the neighbors are going, how could we live in a place like this? And so some of it's about just having people experience what the change can look like, but it's easier to do that if we also hear from the people who want to live in the neighborhood, as well as the people who already live in the neighborhood.
I think that's brilliant. And so I hadn't heard the term YIMBY before. I don't know why I haven't heard that. Who coined that? Did you coin that, Mike? Or is that just
something? I can't take credit for it. But I'm a proud YIMBY.
I love it. I love it. Just flipping the switch to YIMBY, like, let's get over the opposition and just build a permission structure to go forward. I love the consultation piece as well, because I think that's just brilliant. The fact that, we're always asking the people who are already status quo. What about asking the people that would be a part of that new reality, what they want and what they think? And I'm fascinated by that on levels that I think we can apply to other issues. But just sticking with the densification for the last few moments that we have here, Mike, I believe it's your mayor in Guelph. Is it Mayor Guthrie?
Yeah.
He had put out some posts, one that I saw of a building that didn't have a driveway, and talking about the fact, like, why do we have to only have houses with driveways? Why is it the municipality's responsibility to find a place for you to park your car? There are going to be all kinds of people who don't want to have driveways. And that's kind of mind-blowing to see that. Did I get that? Did I characterize it correctly?
Yeah, that's a live debate here in Guelph, and being the MPP, I don't want to get too deep into it because I want to stay in my lane. But sticking with provincial policy, like, one of the things that I think the province needs to do is we need to end the practice of mandatory minimum parking, which isn't to say we're not going to have parking. Like, we'll still have parking. Like, there's no doubt about that. But to stop prioritizing cars over people. And that's the kinds of cities we've been building historically. And I think people want something different. They're still going to need cars. Like, I have a car. Like, I try to walk and ride my bike as much as possible, but I still drive my car. So we're not saying get rid of cars. But if you're going to do that, you also then need to make sure you've invested in high quality transit. We have to have the transit infrastructure in place. We need to make sure that, we have protected bike lanes, that we have opportunities for people in, assisted wheeled mobility devices. And so it's going to make sure that we have the infrastructure to support that change and transition. But if we really, truly want to address the housing crisis and build livable cities that are affordable for people, we have to start creating cities that are not car-centric and that are people-centric, but that there'll still be cars in those people-centric communities. It just won't be totally built for cars.
Yeah, I've never bought into the false binary that it's a war on the car. It's not. It's an and discussion, and we can help people get around safely, whatever their mobility situation is, whatever their preference is. It should be how we all want to have options for getting around in our communities. Mike, it's great to talk to you. I just want to give you an opportunity here at the very end of the Oshow. What do you want people to do? I know be cacophonous and keep showing up at rallies, but what really can we do to support your efforts, which sound like they're bipartisan, which is great at Queen's Park, and I look forward to watching it very closely when your session resumes. But what would you ask of the people of Ontario in order to get to the goal that you say you're continuing to work for, which is the return of those lands, number 15 on the AG's recommendations?
Yeah, I would say continue putting pressure, especially on conservative MPPs. Letters, phone calls, emails, rallies, put a sign up in your yard. I can't tell you how powerful that visual of Doug Ford, keep your promise, keep your hands off the Greenbelt signs are. There are some people, I hope it doesn't come to this, Laura, but I've heard David Crombie say this. I've heard others say this, that if it comes to it, they're going to change themselves to bulldozers. I hope it doesn't come to that, but if it does, then be there to support the people who are going to make those kinds of decisions. This is vital. 5% of Ontario's land is suitable for growing food. 0.5, less than 1% is prime farmland. We've lost 75% of our wetlands in Southern Ontario. We can't lose any more. That's why the Greenbelt is so vital, and it's why it's worth fighting for.
Well said, Mike. You have a small party, but it's been mighty in this fight. And I hope that you get the support of your other colleagues in the legislature to really get accountability on this scandal for those of us who are furious about the corruption, and also to protect those lands for those of us, many people who recognize the value in the green land from a human perspective and for the future of our children and our communities. Wonderful to talk to you, Mike. Take care.
Take care, Laura. Pleasure to be on.
And if you've enjoyed watching the Oshow, as we know many of you are, especially as we talk about the Greenbelt, please subscribe and we'll keep bringing you the great content.
When you care about current affairs, it's on the Oshow. And when you want to get clear what's going on here, it's on the Oshow. If you like to stay in the know, tune yourself into the Oshow. It's the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. A lot of great guests, she puts them to the test on the Oshow. There's no doubt they'll be calling them out on the Oshow. Stand for something or fall for it all. Ontario, hear the call of the Oshow. It's a podcast, the Oshow. Laura Babcock's the Oshow. Stay informed with the Oshow.